Ladies, have you been wanting to make a change, but you don't feel ready? Here's the truth. Readiness is a lie. The model of confidence for women is backward, and we need to flip it. I'm Cara Moeller Poppit, author of a new book, Big Freaking Change. After coaching thousands of women, I discovered action gives us confidence, not the other way around. If we wait to feel ready, we'll wait forever. So if you're ready to get unstuck and step into the life you've always dreamed about, visit bigfreakinchange.com right now and order your copy. Welcome to the Big Freaking Change podcast, where we dive deep into the stories of those who took bold action, embraced uncertainty, and transformed their lives without ever feeling ready. I'm your host, Cara Moeller Poppit, author of The Big Freakin' Change and the creator of the Get Unstuck Cycle of Change model. Each week, we'll sit down with remarkable individuals who have taken bold steps in their lives, personally and professionally, to make meaningful change. Whether you're seeking a career shift, personal growth, or a boost in confidence, our goal is to inspire you to stop waiting and start taking action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Big Freaking Change. I'm your host, Cara Moeller Poppit, and I'm so excited to be here with Kathy Oneto. Kathy is an executive and life work coach, speaker, and facilitator who helps ambitious individuals and organizations explore how to live and work differently for greater success, satisfaction, and sustainability. With a portfolio career, she is also a strategy executive who bridges her two worlds, applying strategic approaches to life and work decisions and practices. Kathy is the founder of Sustainable Ambition, host of the Sustainable Ambition podcast, and author of The Sustainable Ambition: How to Prioritize What Matters to Thrive in Life and Work. As a strategist, Kathy has had a 25-year career working across businesses, branding, innovation, and talent. In her work today, she partners with ambitious organizations and leaders to illuminate and make progress on what matters, helping them do better for their business, customers, and people. She holds an MBA from UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business and a BS in Commerce from the University of Virginia's McIntyre School. She is certified in the Coactive Coaching Model and by the International Coaching Federation. Kathy, warm welcome to the show. Your bio is so amazing, and I'm so grateful to have you on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Cara. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Kathy, I would love to just kind of start off with your book since you recently launched. I've read parts of it, I've heard you speak, and it really moved me. And the thing that I want to share with the listeners, Sustainable Ambition, you had this beautiful framework, and I feel like it gave me permission to kind of reflect on my life, reevaluate it, and go, okay, you're an ambitious person, and now it's okay to pause. But talk to me about why you started writing this incredible book and what inspired you to do so.
Yes. Well, part of why I started to write this book was because I've been asking questions about like success. What do I want to be doing in my life? You know, how do I navigate all the different things I want to do? And I've experienced periods of time where I've burnt out or felt really overwhelmed. And I've made choices over time to make things more sustainable for myself and also navigate what I really want across both my personal life and my professional life. And I think I've always been ambitious, both professionally and personally. And so I've navigated these different types of ambitions over time. And I've always been on this quest, kind of looking for answers. And so at some point, I, started to get into my next life and work arc and started to pursue my second act and wanted to have a body of work. And this was an area like, how do we navigate our ambitions over time? Started looking at career. Well, how do we navigate a career over time? But honestly, over time, I've broadened that view, and it's almost less interesting for me to just think about like how you navigate a career. It's really more interesting. Well, how do we navigate our ambitions over time? And honestly, then I started to hear friends and others asking these same questions, like what used to feel successful to me doesn't feel successful, or those things aren't motivating me anymore, or hearing I'm over my ambition. And that was even pre-pandemic, or people saying like the way I'm operating right now just isn't sustainable. And so I had my own personal experiences, but then I was starting to hear it from others. And this term sustainable ambition came to me. I kind of think about it as Elizabeth Gilbert talks about, the creative muse kind of sometimes gives you these things. And it's like, are you going to pick it up and go with it? Or are you going to let somebody else take it? Well, I chose to pick it up and kind of said, well, what is this thing, sustainable ambition? And as I started to put a framework around it, I paused and actually realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've actually think I've been living this way all my adult life. And it's not to say I always get it right. Quite the contrary. That's how we learn. When we don't get it
Yes.
right is how we start to learn. Right. And so it was interesting to reflect back on that and start to realize, this has kind of been a concept that's been with me as I've been growing over time.
And I love that it's preventative in the way of, we're going to prevent burnout, but we're going to reevaluate your life as you go. And you talk about these different arcs in our life. So talk to us a little bit deeper about that.
Yeah, well, let me step back. I will just share with people like, well, how do I think about sustainable ambition and what does it
Yes.
mean? Because that's probably helpful. Sustainable ambition to me is about how do we pursue our goals and dreams in a way that's fulfilling and manageable in the short term and over the long term, rather than start to become all consuming and leading to feeling like we're starting to sacrifice ourselves or our life in the process of pursuing what we want. And so you mentioned the method, which I share in the book. So to me, it's about how do we become a little bit more consciously ambitious? How do we direct our ambitions wisely by aligning the right ambitions at the right time with the right effort? And right doesn't mean there's a right or wrong from a societal perspective or somebody judging you. It's about the Goldilocks kind of right. Like, how do we get it just right for you? Because I think it takes a dialing in. And I think this gets back to what you were talking about, which was that element of right ambition at the right time and even right effort, because these interact. Sustainability, I believe, exists in the middle of those things. But from a standpoint of, I do talk about, ambition. When we talk about ambition, we often think it's bad. I think it's good. We all are naturally ambitious as humans. And, we often think that ambition is just one mode, or we think about it as a character trait. And I believe that ambition ebbs and flows over time, and that I think we just forget. I think it's so natural to recognize when I say it, like, what we want for ourselves is likely going to change over time because the world around us changes, we change. And yet people are often surprised when it happens. They're like, wait a second, I no longer want what I want, or I'm not fulfilled by that anymore. And yet, there's so many factors that can lead to that. And so that's part of what I'm hoping with the book, is that people can recognize, like, look, ambition does change over time. It can ebb and flow, meaning like there are going to be times when we want to be really intense and leaning in, and there's going to likely be times when we need to be incubating, or like we need a pause, or we aren't quite as ambitious in this moment, or something shifts for us, or we hold the same values. We're just at this stage of life prioritizing them differently. So there are a number of different things that can impact whether or not we're leaning in or we're leaning back, or, whatever phrase you want to use. But I think that it's important or helpful if we can allow ourselves to recognize that ambition isn't just one mode or one thing.
That's so powerful, because I do think it's like I have it or I don't. And I love that you mentioned that most people think it's bad. Let's go deeper on that. Why do we think it's bad?
I think we think it's bad because of the societal definitions around ambition. We live with constructs in our world, and we humans create them. We say, ambition is oftentimes a bad thing because we think about Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street. And I do, greed is not good, in terms of the respect that, he speaks about things. And so I think we think about individuals like that in terms of being ambitious. I also think that if you even look at the dictionary definition of ambition, it is about like pursuing goals that we want with a high level of hard work and intensity. And so I think that in some respects too, this is why people say I'm over my ambition, because they also presume that ambition has to be about always driving and always hard work. And I believe yes, I believe in hard work, but I also believe in sustaining ourselves, and that's a key component of being able to have sustainable ambition. So I do think there's these societal norms too, right? And especially women, of course, are viewed negatively if we are ambitious for for whatever reason. So I do think that it's just our societal expectations and our view of these things as opposed to the reality, which is as human beings, we are goal oriented. It's just
Mhm.
a reality. We
Mhm.
naturally want things and have desires. And so are we just guiding those ambitions in a way that serves us versus not, is how I might think about it.
Oh, I love that. Guiding the ambitions that serve us. That's powerful. You touched on a very important part that, a man is often praised when he has ambition. That's so great. He's so ambitious and he climbs the corporate ladder or reaches his personal empire or whatever it may be successfully as a business or his career. But a woman that has ambition is often looked at differently. She wants too much. She's driven too hard. She can't relax, all these different things. Do you think that's ever going to shift in our society?
It's a great question. I think it already has in some ways, but of course it hasn't completely. I hesitate to say it's sadly probably not going to fully shift,
Mhm.
but yet, honestly, part of even my work is to, suggest that, like, again, it's not taboo to say I'm ambitious, right? And so part
Yeah.
of even this is a part of us reclaiming and
Mm.
redefining what ambition means for us. It's hard to forecast that, Cara. I
Yeah.
mean, there are
Yeah.
things that one would hope would have changed by now. And
Yes.
yet, I mean, really, if you look at the entire world as opposed to, you're in Canada, I'm in the US. I was just listening to Jacinda Ardern speak, former Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she represents a unique type of ambition. But I think that, these role models, I think, can help, in terms of making it a little bit more okay for all of us to be ambitious about what we want. And I think I might even, perhaps in shifting that narrative again, there's this, I really think about sustainable ambition as being a no judgment zone. Like you can be just as ambitious about raising a family, being a strong community leader, as caring for your older parents. Like we can be like I'm broadening our view
You
of
are.
ambition
Yes.
too. And so I think my hope is by doing that, perhaps that it will shift that narrative.
That's powerful because I never really looked at ambition on a personal side. I never really looked at it that way. And you did broaden the lens, right? And you're saying, it's a good thing. And it's about that consistency and that drive and that effort. And the United Nations published a report that says it's going to take 286 years before we experience gender equality. And the research suggests that, we're nurturers, females, we're wired this way. We take care of other people before ourselves. Our ambitions tend to go on the back burner if you're somebody who has a family. And, there's all these different things that say society needs to evolve. And we are, like, women are going into workforces that are more male dominated. Women are getting more education now. They're having families later if they choose to have families. There's lots of people that are just choosing not to. And our role in society continues to evolve. And I think you made a very valid point that we are meant to change. Our ambitions can change, our hopes and desires can change, our values can change. And you mentioned that it's about phases of life. And I think that's really powerful because what served us 5 years ago with our career ambition or personal ambition may shift and may change. And for it to be okay. I really love that feeling and that message that you share. I'd love to know a little bit more, Kathy, about your biggest freaking change that you made that you want to share and if you felt ready for it.
So the change that I share is, so I grew up on the West Coast of the United States. And as you mentioned, I went to college at the University of Virginia. And that was my big change. I, for some reason, really wanted to go to school on the East Coast. I just wanted to have a different experience and challenge myself that way. So that was a really big change. I mean, I was 18 years old and put on a plane. Back then, I will date myself. Like, it was expensive to get on a plane. And my
Yes.
parents did not fly back with me. They put me on a plane with 4 suitcases, and I had to get out by myself with 4 suitcases and find my way to the school and to my dorm and get set up. So that was a bit of a culture shock. It's even when I learned from going from dry California weather to like humid August weather in Virginia, and I realized I had curly hair. I didn't realize that until that moment. That was a big
Oh, I
change.
love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a big change. I hear you. Oh, that's funny. Kathy, there's something to be said about when we're younger, we often can embrace change or feel ready for change a little easier. And my experience has been the older I get, the more I overanalyze or I'm less fluid in making change. So when I was 17, I moved to Mexico by myself. I worked illegally without knowing it was illegal. And I was a dancer in a hotel and, I wrote my last diploma and off I went. And I look back on that year because I lived in Mexico and then I moved to Dominican and I had just this incredible year of change. Like everything was different. The culture, the language, the people, the food, everything. And it taught me to embrace change. But if I look at myself now in my 40s, if I would be courageous enough to go do that now, I wouldn't. So talk to me about maybe age and how you see that kind of play into it.
I think that's a great observation because this was a change that I did feel like I was ready for at that moment. But, it's built into what's expected, right? I was meant
Yes.
to go off to college. And so, yes, it was a big change to go from California to the East Coast. But I also think you're bringing up something really important here, which also for me, I've learned over time that some of my ambitions I actually don't think that hard about. It's kind of like
Mm,
it's instinctual. It's like I
mm.
just wanted to go to school on the East Coast. Oh, I just wanted to live in New York City. I remember what drove me there, but and so sometimes I don't overanalyze it. Right, to your point about like, okay, it's just kind of I want that, I'm going to go do it, and then I don't overanalyze. Well, what is that experience actually going to be like, and what is it going to take to go through that experience? Because I will tell you, it was not easy. It was hard, but I wouldn't change a thing. I grew so much and learned so much. And so it is interesting to kind of reflect on that. I do think, one of my philosophies, actually, I learned this through the work on sustainable ambition, actually, Cara, in interviewing people, which is one of the key things I've asked before is like, well, what advice would you have for your 20-year-old self or younger self? And often people say I would take more risks when I'm younger. And what I've learned over time interviewing different people is, I would say take good risk always. So one of my good friends, Mike Murgatroyd, who I had on my podcast, talked about this idea of taking good risk and good risk being risks that are in alignment with who you are and what you want for yourself. And so you're not taking risks that are just like random, and
Yes.
kind of may feel too scary. So I like this idea of like, yes, I think that what happens, and when you're young, you're not, you don't have any shackles, you're free, you don't have any burdens. And you don't know any better. So you just
It's
go
so
for
true.
it,
You
right?
just go for it.
You just go for
Yeah.
it. And then you get older and you start to have responsibilities and you start to
Yes.
think there's also more. I don't know. I wonder if at that time, too, again, societal structures are set up such that they allow for a little bit more freedom during that time. I don't know these days. I think we don't allow younger kids these days enough freedom during this time to explore and what have you. But we
Mhm.
start to get into a path, into a groove. And so many people, I was just talking to somebody about this where they were saying so many people say to them, well, I could never do that. I could never do that. I can't take a month off work. I could never leave my job. I could, right? So we start to put these boundaries around ourselves and we do end up having certain responsibilities. Of course, that's going to start to put some structures as we get later in life. But I might challenge us, right? To kind of say like, are these really actual barriers or are they,
Societal.
perceived barriers, yeah, or
Yeah.
societal barriers. And honestly, some of these societal barriers, they are real. It really bums me out, right? It's kind of like
Yeah.
I truly believe in that ambition ebbs and flows, or that we should be really look at ambitions considering life and work together. And yet you look at the societal structures and it's like, hello, like, women have babies. It's a reality. It's been a
Mhm.
reality for a really long time. So are we going to set up our structures to recognize that and support that or not? Right. Or I also believe that we confound ourselves as well as society or organizations, this idea of potential and pace, that a high potential person is somebody who's moving quickly, right? As opposed to, do you know how many people have accomplished great things like where they found their spark or what it was they were going to really focus on in their 40s and beyond and have had great success, right? So we confound these things instead of allowing for, some of these late bloomers, if you will.
Yeah, but that's an excellent point. Kathy, I remember so I have 3 children and I ran my own dance studio and my business. And when I had my children, I didn't have a maternity leave. And I remember breastfeeding and typing emails. And I was like, this is not great. And my kids would have a nap and most moms would have a nap or take care of themselves if they've been up all night. And I would be working. And now when people ask me, when younger women say, how do you know when you're ready to have a family if if you're ambitious and you have your own business or whatever. And I say, you never feel ready for a huge change, but you lean into it, you trust yourself and you figure it out. And when people ask me, what's the best advice? I would say, like, don't push through so hard, because I look back and go, man, like, yes, I made the best out of it, but I also kind of missed a lot. Your expectations are still there on yourself and your career. But what would it, maybe if I had a nanny for different periods of time or hired more support at the studio, your life could be different. And so I always encourage people, there's no right or wrong answer, but you got to take care of yourself in the process. And I think that message needs to be hammered home more often than, you got to work hard to reach your goals and, all the programming that we may have had and, to drive, but it's at what cost? And so now in my chapter of life right now, I'm talking about to myself of like, you need to simmer, you need to pause, you need to pour into yourself, you need to go for your workout and not be so rushed, like to give myself the time, because for my whole life, I feel like I've always just gone so hard. So that's something that your book and your message really spoke to of, give yourself, the ambition's going to come back. It's still there, but you can focus it on yourself for a while and put a pause on these career goals. And having babies is something that changes us, for people that do have it and the pause in their career. And I love that you spoke on alignment, because alignment is really key, right? When we change and evolve, what's aligned with us now? What's important to us now? What do we need to facilitate now? And taking a month off work or doing these crazy things that we think we shouldn't or couldn't is very powerful, because we have one life, we don't get a dress rehearsal, and we have to make it the best for us. But talk to me about your thoughts on all of that.
Well, I talk about in the book this idea of pacing, and I really think that pacing is quite important. And it's honestly one of my biggest strategies that I use to keep myself sustained over time. I think that's both pacing in terms of thinking about what you might be pursuing over time in terms of arcs, like I write about in the book, in terms of, well, what is important to focus on now? What really matters now? What can be pushed off till the next time frame, and what might be further out? And so I think I talk about it as now, near, and next. So it might be that's near, and then what might be next. And so thinking about it in that context too. One other thing I want to talk about in terms of you're talking about simmering. I think one thing that often people don't realize, more and more I'm starting to see our ambition cycles. I do work around innovation and creativity. And so I'm starting to see it as a creative process, where creative processes often go through periods of uncertainty, and you have this fuzzy front end time where you're kind of exploring and letting things simmer and like figuring out what might be next. And then it's like it starts to crystallize. And once you then determine what you're meant to do, then you're like, okay, now I can be in action mode, right? And it's not a common thing for us to allow ourselves that upfront time to kind of allow that percolating. We're always, we kind of really try to strive to get to clarity too quickly. Like almost all my coaching clients, right? I want clarity. I want clarity. It's like, okay, I just want to forewarn you. It's going to probably take some time, but we don't want to hear that. So it's really like, how do I get to clarity on just the next step? Perhaps I think of that simmering as partly potentially like, ooh, let me give myself space to figure out what might be next, instead of just driving. Because sometimes when we just drive, we may be starting to pursue things that we don't even really want, right? We're just doing the next thing that's in front of us. But the other part of simmering that I'm hearing you talk about, I talk about in the book, right? Effort is really about two different things. One being discerning about like, where are we putting in that hard work, and like not making the assumption that our ambitions are created equal and everything deserves the same level of effort. But also, so importantly, well, how am I sustaining myself? How am I managing my energy so that I can keep myself sustained over time? And again, it's just so often our world today, especially, kind of has this pressure to kind of always be doing, always be moving, as opposed to recognizing that humans have two states of using our energy and then we have to restore it. And it goes beyond just sleeping.
Yes.
So
Yes.
really being conscientious of that and allowing ourselves that space. And I do think about, it's interesting. I just had somebody say like, hey, the book helped me like recognize I do often take the small breaks, because I talk about taking small breaks, but he's like, I recognize I was not in this extended kind of view of looking at my calendar and timeline, because I suggest that people look at like even a 12 to 18 month horizon. He's like, I wasn't figuring out those breaks along the way, the bigger kind of lens. And so that's a little bit of what I hear you talking about in terms of the simmering time, that it's like, okay, you've been going. And we
Yes.
both know like a book
Yeah.
journey is wow. I mean, this to me, I'm like, this is an endurance event. I'm like, this has been a
Yes.
unique ambition. I'm like, I don't know if I've done another ambition like this. And so,
Yeah.
it requires some pausing and restoration time for sure.
Oh, yes. And something that's so true is when we do something so big, right? There's a stat 80% of people want to write a book, less than 1% do it. Of those 1%, how many get published? How many, it's such a small amount. And it's not because of maybe lack of ambition. People might start it, but it's completion. And I think that the challenge is there's so many challenges in writing a book, of getting your message clear, of all the drafts, of all the revisions, of all the edits, of being so vulnerable too. Writing a book is very vulnerable, putting your mind on paper and then letting people judge it, really, right? And what it taught me through the process was, don't disqualify myself until I'm disqualified. I kept saying this to myself, and I write about it in the book in another example, but often when we're doing something so big, we can give up on ourselves or the process along the way because it is so hard. And I think sometimes we just need to stay the course if it's really important to us. I mean, I waited 10 years before I wrote my book, and it took me 5 years, and it was a beast. And now I'm like, wow, like I did this thing that I said I would and I thought I would, and now it's done. But I think sometimes we forget the different phases that we're going to go into, and that doing something new for the first time, I believe readiness doesn't exist. Like, we can't feel ready to write a book until we actually start doing it. And now, after the book, now I'm confident. But before the book, like even a few weeks before I launched, I was like, man, I am driving this sucker and I don't know what my results are going to be. And, you don't know your sales numbers. You don't know how many people you've reached. There's all this uncertainty. And I doubted myself. I'm like, maybe it's not going to be that great, or it's what I anticipate. And literally, in 3 weeks, everything shifted. It was like I made some lists, and there was credibility, and Forbes mentioned the book, and all these great things happened. And then I felt confident, right? It was like, you have to launch and put your effort out and be vulnerable with no indication from the market. And then after you take action, your confidence follows. Talk to me about ambition and how you see that as a part of people who have a goal to take action. And like you said, we just need to know the next right step. We don't need to know the whole path. What is the next right step? And also that doing anything new for the first time is going to bring up a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. And we kind of got to trust that ambition, right? We got to trust ourselves in the process as well. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, Kathy.
Yes, so much good stuff. I think that there's some overlap in how we think about things. And I think that, one of the key things about ambitions and goals, or what we think we might want, right? And let's say it's this change that we're going for. It's really hard to forecast exactly what that's going to be like, and to know, am I going to like that? Or, what exactly is it going to entail? You won't know unless you get into action. Or is it the right fit for me? And so unless you start experiencing it, you're not going to truly know. And so to your point, you kind of have to, like I said, I just wanted to go to school on the East Coast. I didn't know exactly what it's going to be, but then get over there, get into it, figure out what you need to do, and build your confidence along the way. And I think that part of what happens too is that ambitions grow over time. And so, somebody that I interviewed on my podcast had interviewed a lot of Olympians and Nobel laureates and people like that who have achieved these external measures of success. And she said, they don't start out saying, I want to win a gold medal. They just say, I want to run this time, or what have you. Or they don't start out saying, I want to win a Nobel Prize. They just start out with, hey, I'm curious about this thing and I want to research it. And so it's kind of like you build your confidence over time. As you're saying, you take that first step, and then it's kind of like, okay, I've built some self-efficacy now. Like, now what's the next thing? So sometimes when things feel really big, what I often say to people, which may sound a little confusing, but as I said, bring it closer in. Like, okay, this big ambition that's out there. Well, what is that closer step? So to your point, like, I knew I wanted to write, but I didn't start by writing a book.
Right. Yes.
I started with, oh, let me take a writing class and actually learn about magazine writing. Or I started with a class and just getting my feet wet, And so I built my way up to this larger ambition that I had.
And I think that's powerful is that we got to trust the process, trust ourselves. And I talk about this in my book that our viewpoint changes, right? So if me and you would have connected a few months ago, we'd be like, we're never writing another book. This was crazy. This took everything out of me, blah, 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 blah. And now it's like, okay, I did it. So maybe I could write another book, right? Like your viewpoint expands with the more expansion that we have as humans. And I think that talks about change too. We're meant to evolve. We're encouraged. It's in our evolution that we have goals we want to achieve. And then when we achieve those goals, our lens of life also shifts. And I think that is very important for us instead of judging ourselves. Oh, I used to want this, but now I don't. Or I used to have this big ambitious goal and now I don't. It's beautiful because we have changed in the process of change. When we make a change, we change in the process. And I think that's the most beautiful gift that hardship, change, challenging times, writing a book, whatever it may be, gives us, is that we've changed through the process.
I love that. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. I like to think about it as like, remember, this is a learning journey. Life is a learning journey. And I've been reading a lot about uncertainty recently, and it's a reminder. Imagine if your life was already set out and all you were doing, you already knew every single step and you knew how the story was going to play out. Would you want that life? I mean, it sounds pretty boring to me, right?
Yeah.
And so allow for some change, allow for some uncertainty.
That's great. Kathy, I'd love to know how you define courage.
Courage is so important. I think about it as moving forward despite the things that can stop us. So those things could be fear, it could be despair, it could be fear of judgment. I guess that goes along with fear, right? But, what can stop us can be a lot of different things, but moving forward despite that.
And how would you say courage plays into having a big goal and having ambition, whether it's personally or professionally? So I believe we need to flex our courage muscle. It's always within us. We don't need more confidence before we take action. We actually need to tap into our courage. And I love the analogy of, you work out in the gym. You don't work out once and you're in shape for the rest of your life. You have to do it daily or weekly. Same thing with courage. It's a muscle that you need to flex. And the more you flex it, the more you realize your potential and what you're made of. And I think that's the most beautiful gift we can give ourselves, is that self-trust, that self-reassurance, that self-love. But talk to me how courage plays into being very ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a couple of ways. One is just when taking on an ambition or something that you want, there often is that uncertainty or you're not sure, and you are building self-efficacy as you move toward it. And so it often is that you're building, just as you're talking about, you're building your confidence along the way. And when you are building confidence, it takes courage to continue to move toward that, right? To step into that growth mindset and to allow yourself. Another way to think about courage, I think, is to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness, to be comfortable with the uncomfortableness, right?
Yes.
And so I also talk about courage in my book in the sense that it often takes courage to step out of the norm of your norm. And I'm kind of borrowing from another friend who was on my podcast and saying that sustainability or choosing what you want for yourself, choosing based on internal, your internal voice versus just doing what society expects of us or what other external drivers expect of us often takes courage because you are often going against the norm. So I think going after an ambition that is really personally driven, that's focused on personal reward, can often take that going deep, really tapping into that courage that you have within yourself to kind of say, this is what I want and I'm going to go for it.
I love that. Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your time and your brilliance with us. I hope that all the listeners remember that our ambition will change. It will ebb and flow in life. We want to talk about the right effort, the right time, and the right
ambition.
Thank you for closing it up. Kathy, where can everyone find more about you and buy your book? Because it is a game changer.
Thank you so much. People can find me at sustainableambition.com. There's also links there for the book, and they can also find me on LinkedIn and also listen to my podcast.
Amazing. So, listeners, remember to ask yourself, what is the next right step that you need to take today? And are you in a moment of expansion, or do you need to contract and let it simmer? And as Kathy says, crystallize. I love that analogy. That's going to serve me. And also, Kathy shares a lot about giving ourselves permission, right? To shift and change and evolve, and to look at our life as it is now with the new factors, with the new information that we have, and making our ambition sustainable, which is so key to life, because nobody wants to be burnt out. Nobody wants to have regret. And I love the lens that you've shared. So, Kathy, thank you for being on the podcast today. It's great to see you. And to all of our listeners, take the next right step today. Bye for now. We hope you enjoyed this episode and would be so grateful if you could share it with someone else that could benefit from it. Let's remember to change our relationship to change itself and take aligned action. If we want to make meaningful changes in our lives, we need to embrace stepping into the next version of ourselves in the process. Remember, stop waiting to feel ready and start taking action today.